16 shootings in Jacksonville just since Valentine's Day.
14 people have been hurt, 9 people have died, and that is the violent landscape of Jacksonville at the moment.
Something that might change this landscape for better or for worse could be the demolition of the Jacksonville Landing. Now, some say it'll be good riddance, tear the thing down. But 2 years after JSO opened a stop station there, the question remains, what will happen to police presence in that area in downtown? Whatever does turn out to occupy it. First Coast News' Jeff Vallon talked with people at the landing.
And they feel that space needs a police post no matter what.
It's a safe area down here at the landing.
Paul Glazer and others want to keep it that way, regardless of what's to become of Jacksonville Landing. Now that an agreement between the city and the current tenant could bring the wrecking ball.
I would like to see an aquarium.
That's one idea that's been floated. Another is public park space. The sheriff's office opened a police stop station inside the landing in June 2017, just 5 months after a deadly shooting. A JSO crime map shows 33 incidents within a roughly 500-foot radius in the last 6 months, including theft and burglary, but also some violence. The JSO stop station would be leveled along with the landing, but even if the landing goes, the people we met want a police post of some kind to stay.
If we do the park or the aquarium to bring in visitors and so forth, we need to have that comfort of safety.
Of course, the police stop station was there when the mass shooting happened last August.
I didn't stop that, but it could, seeing that here for the first time, it could stop future incidents like that.
Paul Glazer also credits his safe assessment of the landing, apart from those extreme exceptions, to men and women in uniform. He hopes the JSO office will stick around even if the landing doesn't.
Well, I think they should. I mean, we have police here. I mean, every day, every night, there's always, a presence of police officers, JSO down here.
At the landing in Jacksonville, Jeff Vallon, First Coast News, on your side.